Birdman is unraveling in real time, and the most unsettling part is that it's happening in plain sight. Not through a dramatic downfall or a sudden headline announcing the end of an era, but through quiet, disturbing moments that linger far longer than they should. A head slowly dropping on stage. A body freezing mid-performance. A man who once commanded entire rooms now appearing disconnected from the moment, as if his mind has drifted somewhere his body can't follow. These moments don't scream collapse, they whisper it. And whispers, when repeated often enough, become impossible to ignore. They settle into the background noise of the culture, slowly rewriting how people see you. This isn't the story of a man who died young or burned out fast. It's the story of a man still standing while everything he built begins to weather, crack, and erode around him in public. By early 2025, the conversation surrounding Birdman had undeniably shifted. For decades, his name had been tied to lawsuits, money disputes, industry feuds, and relentless controversy. That noise had become familiar, almost expected. But now the discussion wasn't about paperwork or power anymore, it was about his health, his appearance, his awareness. Fans weren't arguing over contracts or legacy rankings. They were asking a more human question: is he okay? The Hot Boys reunion tour was meant to be a celebration, a moment frozen in time for a generation raised on cash money dominance. Birdman on stage with Lil Wayne, Juvenile, Turk, and BG for the first time since 2000 should have felt like a victory lap. For the culture, it was history revisiting itself. For longtime fans, it was emotional closure. But instead of joy, the moment arrived wrapped in discomfort. Viral footage captured Birdman nodding off mid-performance, his head suddenly dropping as he stood behind Turk, frozen for long, unsettling seconds that felt heavier the longer the clip played. The stage lights stayed bright. The crowd kept moving, and Birdman stood there motionless, like time had skipped him entirely. BG eventually had to physically tap him to pull him back into the moment. That single gesture said more than words ever could. The clip spread instantly, replayed millions of times, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame. Some laughed it off. Some turned it into memes. But beneath the jokes was a current of unease. A feeling that people were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Social media filled the silence with speculation, as it always does. People pointed to lean, exhaustion, relapse, seizures, age, or the cumulative toll of decades spent living hard without pause. Others pushed back, insisting it was nothing more than fatigue, the result of a grueling tour schedule or long travel days. Turk brushed it off publicly. BG laughed it off in interviews, but reassurance didn't stick because months later it happened again. Another clip surfaced from an October 2025 event in Harlem. Same posture, same vacant pause, same unsettling stillness. This time there was no laughing it away, no benefit of the doubt. The conversation shifted from curiosity to concern. It was no longer what happened. But how long has this been happening, and how much worse has it already become? As questions about Birdman's health grew louder, his personal life began unraveling just as publicly. Reports surfaced that he had secretly married Toni Braxton in August 2024, only for her to file for divorce a mere 2 weeks later. The filing was dismissed in early 2025, meaning the marriage technically remained intact, but the optics told a very different story. Photos vanished from social media without explanation. Toni stopped wearing her wedding ring. What should have been celebration quietly turned into silence. The absence spoke louder than any statement. When Toni eventually addressed the situation, her words shifted the narrative completely. She described what she called cash money death rituals, carefully clarifying that she wasn't talking about literal voodoo or occult practices. What she described was more subtle and more disturbing. Symbolic systems of control, cultural rituals disguised as loyalty. Public displays meant to reinforce hierarchy and obedience. According to her, allegiance wasn't earned naturally, it was demanded. Independence wasn't encouraged, it was seen as a threat. Artists were expected to surrender parts of themselves in exchange for access, protection, and favor. In her telling, gifts weren't generosity, they were leverage. Power didn't just flow downward, it was enforced upward. She suggested that this culture didn't only damage the artists who passed through it. It consumed the people who built it as well. The pressure to maintain control, the paranoia of betrayal, the weight of years spent ruling through dominance instead of trust, all of it eventually turns inward. From her perspective, Birdman's onstage episodes weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms, physical manifestations of decades of unresolved trauma, stress, habits, and internal conflict finally surfacing where no one could hide them. For Toni, being tied to that environment worsened her own health struggles, including lupus and heart issues. She framed her departure not as abandonment, but as survival. Birdman reportedly responded with anger, accusing her of chasing money, claiming she wanted half his fortune, and even alleging she pawned her engagement ring. The internet fractured instantly. Some saw Birdman defending himself the only way he knew how. Others saw a woman escaping a system that nearly broke her. Rumors involving Tony's sister briefly surfaced and were quickly denied, but the damage had already been done. Health scares, a collapsing marriage, accusations of cult-like behavior. All signs pointing toward a man whose empire no longer looked like protection, but a weight he could no longer carry. And that's where the story turns uncomfortable. Because when the armor starts to slip, people begin asking questions they once ignored. Not just about what Birdman built, but how he built it, and what it cost him along the way. She spoke about loyalty being enforced through spectacle and symbolism rather than trust, respect, or shared purpose. Matching tattoos weren't just branding exercises. They were permanent declarations of allegiance, marks that stayed long after the music stopped and the money slowed down. Public displays of devotion weren't spontaneous gestures of gratitude. They were expected performances, reminders to everyone watching who held power and who depended on it. Everyone calling Birdman Daddy wasn't casual language. It reinforced hierarchy, ownership, and emotional dependence. Luxury cars lined up like offerings weren't simply symbols of success. They were visual proof of access, reminders that wealth flowed through one man's approval. Money counted on camera wasn't celebration. It was documentation, proof of loyalty recorded for the world to see. According to her, gifts weren't acts of love or generosity. They were tools of leverage, silent agreements that tightened their grip the more you accepted. Every reward came with an unspoken obligation, and every benefit carried a shadow. The message, in her view, was unmistakable. Loyalty wasn't optional, independence was dangerous, and freedom always came at a cost. Those who questioned the system didn't just get pushed aside or left behind. They disappeared quietly. Phone calls stopped. Opportunities vanished. Names were no longer mentioned. Relationships were rewritten as if they had never existed. To Tony, it felt less like a record label and more like a closed society governed by unwritten rules, where obedience determined survival and dissent led to isolation. You didn't just work within the system, you belonged to it. And once you belonged, leaving meant losing more than money. It meant losing protection, relevance, and identity. She suggested that this environment didn't only destroy the artists who passed through it, it slowly poisoned the person who created it. Maintaining control at that level required constant vigilance. Constant suspicion, constant pressure. Trust became a liability. Vulnerability became weakness. Over time, the posture of dominance stopped being a strategy and became a way of life, one that left no room for rest. From her perspective, Birdman's onstage episodes weren't random accidents or harmless moments of fatigue. They were symptoms. The physical manifestation of decades spent carrying stress, paranoia, habits, grief, and unresolved trauma without ever releasing it. A body reacting to weight the mind had learned to ignore. For Tony, remaining connected to that energy worsened her own health struggles. Lupus flared. Heart issues intensified. Stress stopped being emotional and became physical. What began as exhaustion turned into a threat to her survival. Staying meant deterioration. Leaving meant choosing herself. She chose survival. Birdman reportedly responded with anger, accusing her of chasing money, claiming she wanted half of his fortune, and even alleging she pawned her engagement ring. The internet split instantly, as it always does when power collides with vulnerability. Some defended Birdman as a hardened boss protecting his empire, arguing this was simply the cost of operating at the highest level. Others saw Tony as someone escaping an environment she barely survived. Rumors involving her sister Tamara briefly surfaced and were quickly denied, but by then the speculation had already added fuel to the fire. In the public eye, perception often becomes reality. Health scares, a collapsed marriage, accusations of cult-like control. All of it reinforced the growing sense that Birdman's empire no longer looked like armor, it looked like weight. Something heavy he had carried for so long that it was finally beginning to bend him. To understand how Birdman reached this point, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the charts, not the contracts, the mud. Brian Christopher Williams was born on February 15, 1969 in New Orleans, Louisiana in the Magnolia Projects. Poverty wasn't a phase he passed through, it was the environment that shaped his instincts. Violence wasn't an exception, it was routine. Survival wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. He grew up surrounded by chaos, addiction, instability, and constant loss, raised within a massive family where stability was fragile and fleeting. His mother, Miss Gladys, did what she could to hold things together, but Birdman has never hidden how brutal those early years truly were. He has said he was born into poverty, raised around junkies, shuffled through boys' homes, and never felt safe. Security was never guaranteed. Trust was never permanent. Death entered his life early and often. Family members gone, partners lost, loved ones disappearing one by one. By the time he reached adulthood, grief wasn't something he processed, it was something he carried. It shaped how he moved through the world, how he loved, and how he protected himself. Vulnerability became dangerous. Attachment became optional. Emotion became something to suppress rather than confront. By 14, Birdman was already in the streets, absorbing lessons most people never have to learn. By 15, he claims he had seen more money than most people will ever touch in a lifetime, and none of it came from music. It came from risk, hustling, and constant exposure to danger. At 16, reality caught up with him in the hardest way. He caught a heroin case and served 18 months in prison. When he came home, there was no reset button waiting. No therapy, no guidance. No second chance wrapped in optimism, just the same streets, the same rules, and the same pressure, so he leaned into them fully. That decision didn't just shape his future, it hardened him permanently. He learned early that loyalty was everything, betrayal was unforgivable, love was conditional, and power was protection. Those lessons became the foundation of how he built, how he led, and how he survived. In 1991, at just 22 years old, Birdman and his brother Ronald "Slim" Williams founded Cash Money Records. It wasn't born in corporate offices or polished boardrooms. It was built through independent hustle, New Orleans bounce, street instincts, and relentless ambition. Slim dropped out of school early, but Birdman always praised his intelligence when it came to money and structure. Together, they understood leverage. Together, they understood control. They assembled the hot boys, Juvenile, BG, Turk, and a 9-year-old Lil Wayne. Wayne wasn't just another artist on a roster, he was family. Birdman raised him, lived with him, mentored him, and positioned himself as a father figure. The bond blurred lines between business and blood, between guidance and authority. By 1998, Cash Money shocked the industry with a $30 million deal from Universal Records, a number almost unheard of for a Southern independent label at the time. That deal opened the floodgates. Albums went platinum. Singles dominated the charts. Cash Money transformed from a regional powerhouse into a global brand. Birdman went from prison cells to private jets in less than a decade, carrying the mentality of the streets into rooms that had never been built for people like him. And while the success looked unstoppable from the outside, the foundation it rested on was already beginning to strain under the weight of control, loyalty, and unresolved pain. Success didn't erase the darkness, it amplified it. Every achievement seemed to widen the gap between who Birdman became and who he once was. As the money grew and the spotlight intensified, tragedy continued to trail him, not as isolated incidents, but as a steady presence. Losing his father in a car accident didn't just add grief to his life. It reinforced a pattern that had followed him since childhood. People disappear, stability is temporary, and attachment only leads to pain. By that stage, grief wasn't something he mourned openly. It was something he absorbed and buried. He has said that nothing could hurt him worse than what he had already endured, a statement that sounds defiant on the surface but reads more like resignation underneath. He described himself as emotionally numb, already dead inside, immune to pain not because he was strong, but because pain had become familiar. That emotional detachment became armor. It kept him moving forward in hostile environments, but it also dulled his capacity for empathy, patience, and trust. When survival becomes the priority, human connection often becomes collateral damage. Through the 2000s, Cash Money didn't merely succeed, it reshaped the landscape of hip-hop. The label defined an era, dominating radio, charts, and culture. Lil Wayne evolved from a gifted child into a once-in-a-generation artist, redefining lyrical style and mainstream appeal. Drake entered the picture and transcended genre entirely, becoming one of the most influential artists of his time. Nicki Minaj broke barriers and set new standards for global superstardom. Cash Money wasn't just producing artists, it was manufacturing dominance. Birdman's net worth reportedly peaked around $160 million, and he claimed to have generated billions through his long-standing partnership with Universal. The outside world, it looked like the ultimate success story, a man from the projects who beat every odd stacked against him. But internally, the empire was under strain. As the money and power increased, so did the accusations. Artists began speaking more openly, their stories no longer isolated whispers but overlapping accounts. They described bad contracts signed young and desperate, unpaid or delayed royalties, albums shelved as punishment, and pressure tactics used to ensure obedience. What once sounded like bitterness began to resemble a system. The most painful fracture came from Lil Wayne himself. In 2015, Wayne sued Birdman for $51 million, accusing him of withholding advances and royalties owed to him. The lawsuit wasn't just a financial dispute. It dismantled the image of family Birdman had carefully cultivated. Seeing the artist he raised, mentored, and publicly claimed as his son challenge him in court struck at the heart of Birdman's identity as both mogul and father figure. Years later, Birdman would refer to the situation with Wayne as his greatest regret. He maintained that he loved Wayne deeply and believed he had acted in his best interest. He said he eventually paid Wayne more than what was requested, framing it as evidence that his intentions were never malicious. But money cannot undo emotional damage. It cannot erase years of silence, mistrust, and public conflict. Once betrayal enters a relationship, especially one built on blurred lines between family and business, it leaves scars that no settlement can fully heal. Wayne's lawsuit opened the door for others to speak. Juvenile, BG, Manny Fresh, and additional collaborators echoed similar frustrations. Birdman admitted that early in his career he lacked a full understanding of publishing and music business structures, but critics argued that ignorance did not absolve responsibility. Opportunities were delayed or denied. Careers stalled. Relationships fractured beyond repair. And beyond the financial disputes, darker and more unsettling allegations surfaced, shifting the conversation from business ethics to personal conduct. Old footage circulated showing Birdman kissing Lil Wayne on the lips, which Birdman dismissed as father-son affection taken out of context. At the time, many overlooked it. But that context changed permanently when Wayne later revealed that Birdman had arranged for him to lose his virginity to an adult woman when he was only 11 years old. The revelation deeply disturbed the public and forced a re-examination of their entire relationship. What Birdman may have viewed as initiation or guidance, many saw as exploitation and abuse of power. That single revelation cast a shadow backward, reshaping how people interpreted years of interactions, decisions, and loyalty. Violence also remained a constant undercurrent around Cash Money's rise. Multiple artists connected to the label were killed in the late 90s, fueling street rumors that refused to die. In April 2015, those tensions reached a terrifying peak when Lil Wayne's tour bus was shot up in Atlanta. Bullets tore THR, while the vehicle narrowly missing Wayne and his crew. Investigators later linked the shooter to phone calls involving people connected to Birdman and Young Thug around the time of the attack. Prosecutors alleged the shooting was retaliation for Wayne's lawsuit. Birdman denied any involvement and was never charged, but the implication lingered. Feuds escalated. Violence intensified. Cash Money's name remained tied to street conflict, whether proven or circumstantial. In the public imagination, suspicion alone was enough to damage a legacy. Perhaps the most controversial and emotionally charged chapter involved Birdman's own brother, Terrence "Gangster" Williams. Allegedly responsible for more than 20 murders, Terrence served over 2 decades in prison. Many believed his actions were tied to the same street ecosystem that Birdman benefited from and helped shape. When Terrence cooperated with authorities and secured his release in 2024, Birdman severed all ties, calling it a violation of the street code. To critics, the decision felt cold and transactional, a brother abandoned once he became a liability. Loyalty, which Birdman often preached as absolute, appeared conditional when survival, reputation, and power were at risk. Despite everything, the lawsuits, the allegations, the violence, the betrayals, the public scrutiny, Birdman has not disappeared. He remains active, mentoring younger artists and positioning himself as a kingmaker. Most notably, he has invested his energy into NBA YoungBoy, whom he openly believes will become the biggest artist the industry has ever seen. He speaks with the confidence of someone who still believes his instincts are unmatched. Financially, Birdman's situation remains complex and contested. Losses from lawsuits, foreclosures, and failed ventures exist alongside massive passive income generated by his catalog. Reports in 2025 suggested a resurgence, highlighted by the purchase of a $42 million Miami mansion, signaling that the narrative of decline may be premature or incomplete. Still, Birdman insists the industry never gave him his flowers. He believes his street origins, uncompromising methods, and refusal to soften his image kept him from receiving the recognition he deserved. He frames himself as misunderstood rather than condemned, overlooked rather than celebrated. Yet the most revealing statements don't come from his boasts or defenses. They come from his confessions. He says he's already dead inside, that he was born damaged, that he has endured so much loss that nothing can truly break him anymore. And maybe that is the real tragedy. Not that Birdman might die, but that he lived long enough to build everything while never healing the wounds that shaped him. The tragic fate of Birdman isn't a single catastrophic event. It's the slow accumulation of decades, success layered over trauma, power built on fear, loyalty enforced through control, and grief left untreated. He came from the mud, made billions, and now stands surrounded by the wreckage of how he survived. That's the real loss.